So my grandfather was born in Nebraska in 1909, and he lived his childhood and his youth, young adulthood, in the Great Plains of this country, much of it near a place called Charlotte, Montana, and if you look it up, it's the middle of nowhere. In the 19 teens, when he was a young child and a teenager, the population of the state of Montana was about 470,000 human souls. Now, to give you a point of comparison, that's 100,000 fewer people than live in New Castle County today. So take the population of our county, take 100,000 people out of it, and spread it over the fourth largest state in the country, right? So this is the environment. It was remote, sparsely populated, and mostly wide open land. And my grandfather was the oldest sibling of what would eventually be a family of 13 kids. So he wasn't lonely. About 30 years ago, one of my cousins was in college, and she wrote this anthropology paper with my grandfather as her subject. And she shared that paper around the family just because it was kind of wonderful. And I remember that, I don't remember much of the whole paper, but I remember that she asked my grandfather, one of the questions she asked was about the Thanksgiving traditions of what it was like in Charlotte, Montana in the 19-teens. Particularly, she was interested in the food. What was on the Pelley dining table on the fourth Thursday of November? And his response sticks with me. Because the thing he loved most fondly about Thanksgiving, his memory of Thanksgiving out on the Great Plains 100 years ago, wasn't the turkey, because heck, if they wanted turkey, they'd just go shoot one. They'd just send one of the boys out and go get one. Wasn't the potatoes, the mashed potatoes? They grew mashed potatoes. They had abundance of them. It was a staple food. And it wasn't the green beans. Green beans they would have harvested in August and canned, put up for the winter. Plenty. Nope. My grandfather's strongest memory of Thanksgiving table was bananas. You know, I find his recollection of bananas for Thanksgiving to be this charming little anecdote, not antidote. If nothing else, it reminds me that my life now versus my grandfather's childhood 100 years ago was very different. And it reminds me that the modern ubiquity of bananas is one of those innovations that we probably take for granted. Heck, you can go to Wawa 24/7, 365 and probably get a banana. But 100 years ago, to get a banana from the tropics to rural Montana was something of a logistical feat. And I imagine, too, that it was relatively expensive. So it was kind of a special family indulgence to mark a holiday. No wonder that was his memory. And I remember this banana story almost every Thanksgiving as I'm preparing our meal. And it sparks my imagination of his childhood, of all those moments that framed his history and therefore has become a part of my history. The story of having bananas at Thanksgiving connects me to him. Except, I absolutely loathe bananas. I always have. There's something about the combination of taste and texture and smell of those things that I find absolutely disgusting. Now, I will confess that once in a very great while, I will try one, just to see if I still hate them. and the test inevitably triggers my gag reflex. Now, I concede it's not a rational thing. Folks, don't hear me tell you not to eat bananas. Bananas are great nutritional food for you. So if you like them, eat them. They're good. But for me, oh no. And I think it's just a little bit about how I'm built, right? And then it's a little bit about my memories and my history with this particular fruit. And you combine that with a whole lot of accreted time and opinions and reinforce it through experience, and you get my loathing of bananas. So I'm sorry, Granddad. Bananas, just no. This week, of course, in the United States is this holiday of Thanksgiving. It's our second during this global pandemic, or as I've been thinking of these last couple of years, our global pandemics. As you've heard me say before, it's more than just a virus. It's a whole lot of things that are being revealed painfully for us. And as I've said many times, as we are coming out of this, as we are emerging from pandemic, we are living in this time both of trauma and of great ambiguity. The trauma of this separation and this fear that we've had for the last couple of years, combined with the ambiguity of we don't know what's next. And there's that tension that I know many of us feel. And that's what we're carrying with us, right, into this holiday season. And we're bringing it to the proverbial Thanksgiving table, where we will be confronted by both our family histories and our family presences, regardless of whether those that have gathered at your holiday table are your so-called blood relatives or the ones you have simply just chosen as your family. Friends, under stress and trauma, our tribes, they get smaller. And we've witnessed that in the last year or so, right? For sure. And as we work to emerge from these traumas, we are in constant renegotiation about who we wish to draw back in to our tribe, or even which tribes we wish to rejoin. Now, for as long as I can remember, I have been incredibly fortunate to have celebrated this particular holiday with what I at least perceive to be emotionally healthy families. I say families as, of course, the makeup of those gatherings change almost every year. I have no recollection of underlying tensions around the table, save for who got to sit at the adult table and who got relegated to the kids' table. In nearly all my family gatherings, I was the youngest, or nearly so. I was always at the kids' table. And from my seat at the kids' table, I was blissfully unaware of the unspoken disappointments, the political disagreements, the unresolved trauma that may have been silently held over there at the big people's table. But some of those I learned much later in my life. I knew my grandfather to be this incredibly intelligent and kind and strong man. In my memory, I cannot recall any harsh words from his lips, spoken to me or ever in my presence. I feared him, but not in a I'm not safe around him kind of way, but actually the opposite of that. This man seemed so incredibly competent and confident and assured in everything he did that I always felt safe with him. Even when he had me driving the haying tractor when I was 10. But later in my life, I began to learn the complexity of him. He was a stubborn man, it turns out. And his stubbornness would put him in conflict with almost everybody else in my family at one time or another. His stubbornness could come out as very verbally abusive, especially with my grandmother. However, there's a woman who could stand up to him. But that abuse would then put him in conflict with his son, my father, and there was tension there. I also learned later in my life that he had been physically abusive to my cousins. Never to me, though, and never in my presence. So I have spent years trying to reconcile my experience of him against the larger truth of his humanity, of his actual life, not just the little piece that I saw. And as I got old enough to sit at the adults' table at Thanksgiving, the very few times I got to do that with him later in my life, I would sit there and I held this deep curiosity about this man, these things that I had learned against my experience of him and looking in his eyes around that table. But here's the thing, with all I had learned about him, I was afraid to ask. Afraid that my experience of his love and care for me was a distortion of the real man, that he was not the grandfather I knew. And I was thinking about this week, perhaps what my real fear was. That if I confess my hatred of bananas to him, I would be rejecting something of his identity, and that would mean I wasn't a Pelly, that I would not belong. Here's the truest thing I know. What we all yearn for is connection and belonging and love. And it is this yearning that we bring to the Thanksgiving table year after year. These people, our tribes, we are seeking connection with them. And we can be connected in so many different ways, by blood, as we say, or by marriage, or by remarriage. Maybe it's adoption or friendship, connection by choice, connection by invitation, connection even by accident. And I'm remembering the story from several years ago where a woman named Wanda Dench accidentally sent a text invitation to a total stranger, Jamal Hinton. And you know what, folks? That was 2016. And they have been having Thanksgiving together ever since. But beyond connection, we also seek to belong. It's not just enough that we want to be connected, we want to belong to one another. And that is tricky because our sense of belonging is grounded in a sense of mutuality. Belonging occurs for us when we experience our connectedness in life-affirming ways, when we feel cared for and offer our care and compassion to others, when we value people as they are, not as we wish them to be, and when they value us as we are, not as they want us to be. But then we show up at the table, and we bring all of that yearning for connection and belonging, but we also bring all our memories and our histories with these people, combined with a whole lot of accreted time and opinion reinforced by over and over and over experiences. And if you add to that our current state of ambiguity and emergence from pandemics, we find that many of our relationships have frayed. I have heard from folks here, folks around. I've read stories about families who are struggling to negotiate gathering during these holidays, conflicts that arise between those who have chosen to be vaccinated and those who refuse to be vaccinated, conflicts between those who continue to wear facial coverings and those who are angry at being asked to, all that coupled with a sense that our political tribalism has somehow infected those decisions. And into that roasting pan of identity, of memory, of history, we go with this kind of romantic hope that this is the year. This year will be the year when at last our parent or our sibling or our grandfather or our crazy uncle finally gets us, finally understands me for who I am, and I finally get that apology, I finally get that truth, and that finally all our old wounds will be healed. And maybe they will. Or maybe they won't. I'm betting on the latter. I'm betting on the latter, if only to acknowledge that all of our accretions of history and memory that have become fused with our sense of identity, those accretions are unlikely to be shed over the course of one meal. It's a lot to ask of one another over the mashed potatoes and gravy, or even the bananas. One of my mantras, or if we want to call it that, one of the things I remember and try to tell myself, especially when trying to understand someone else's behavior, or specifically my own behavior, is to remind myself it comes from somewhere. It comes from somewhere. You see, it's not just me, Greg, who shows up at the table with accretions of imperfect memories and even more imperfect histories. It's everyone else around my table as well. And so we got to get curious. We have to get curious and open. We have to go beyond the words and behaviors we hear and experience to try to hear the story behind the story. We have to listen. Listen not to convince others of the wrongness of their ideas and the rightness of ours, because you know they're wrong and you know you're right. But we have to listen not to try to convince others, but to be openly curious about where those ideas come from. Because I promise you, they actually do make sense eventually. And here's the thing. I believe that the story behind the story behind the story behind the story is always one of us, one of human beings seeking connection and belonging and love. So perhaps when that conversation becomes an argument about vaccines or masks or Biden or Trump or climate change, we can begin to hear the fears that lie behind the argument, a fear of unknowing, a fear of rejection, that what I believe is unacceptable to you, and therefore I am unacceptable. We begin to find and to locate that fear in that longing for connection. Or perhaps that sibling of yours says something like, "You've always been jealous of me." And we begin to hear behind those words the cry for that mutual sense of care that we call belonging. Or maybe when that parent or that grandparent says, "You're always so ungrateful." And under that, we can begin to hear their yearning for love. Friends, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that this sort of curiosity, this deeper listening for the story behind the story behind the story, it's not easy. We're not very good at it. It's far easier to end up being triggered back into our memories and our histories with these people, back into that that have been combined with that accreted time and opinion and reinforced again and again and again of experience. I ran across this week an essay in the Times, in the New York Times, by Emily Eshfani Smith, who writes this: "Our loved ones are imperfect, and so are we. That means that feelings are going to be hurt this year, and that efforts to express love are going to be clumsy, awkward, marred by pride and stubbornness. Though the pandemic has increased tensions within families, it has also created an opening. Now more than ever, people are recognizing the importance of being together and how precious and fleeting life can be. Keeping these blessings in mind might inspire us to lead with love this holiday season." I'd like to end this today with a kind of communion. A communion with my own complex and sometimes messy family history that's been filled with missed opportunities to connect, to belong, to love. Filled too with years of finding ways, nonetheless, to stay connected, to belong to each other, and to love and be loved. A kind of communion that demonstrates that in the smallest gestures of grace and compassion, we can awaken to love. So, in honor of my grandfather's memories that have become my history, in honor of my grandfather's memories that have become my history, for better or worse, and for all you and your people yearning for connection, belonging, and love, may we be healed and may we be whole. Sorry, Granddad. Still no. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live in blessing.